I mean, first off, any Palantir person who's listening to this, we don't really use the word centers of excellence inside Palantir. I mean, there's going to be functions of people who need to be experts in things, right? That's just de facto. Expertise exists and it has value. But grouping those folks far away from where the work is getting done or where it's needed is a pretty dangerous proposition, right?
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Jim Siders. Jim is the Chief Information Officer of Palantir, a technology firm that connects data, analytics, and operations, allowing users to analyze data and take action. It earns in excess of $3.7 billion in annual revenue. Jim's been with the company for a dozen years, 3 of them as CIO. Jim leads technology for a firm that continues to grow at more than 30% annually, and he does so with a team that's remarkably efficient. His team is also customer zero for the company and its products. His journey is all the more remarkable when you learn that up until he was 30, his life was focused on music. I look forward to hearing more about his remarkable journey through this conversation. Jim, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Thanks so much, Peter. It's good to be here.
Wonderful. Well, Jim, I thought we'd begin with your company itself, Palantir. Talk a bit about what it is that the company does, if you would.
Yeah. Many years ago, my boss, our CTO, Shyam Sankar, was giving a TED Talk. And the way he framed it, and this is long before I worked at the company, I remember watching this TED Talk. He said that it was about, Palantir was about letting computers do what they do best so that humans, analysts in those days in the military and the intelligence world, could do what they do best. So it's evolved into, it's the optimizing the union of the computer and the human doing whatever the work task is that they're doing. So there's a big emphasis on decisioning, on the analysis of whatever pile of data a company or an agency or a government has, yielding a solution to whatever the biggest problems are that they've got. And that can take on a bunch of different forms.
And the nature of your work and the fact that so much of it actually is with governments means that a lot of what you do is secret naturally. And as a result, there's a lot of mystery around Palantir's business as well. It's something it's in some ways been kind of like a beneficial calling card of sorts, I suppose. It makes it more magnetic in some ways. I wonder what your thought is about that.
Well, in some ways, yes. In some ways, no. I mean, I think it's just a truth that whether there's actually data classification laws or rules, or whether it's just, even for a company it's not in the government, sometimes their most important problems that they have the least idea how to solve are the things they feel most sensitive about. And the solution to those things ends up being part of their competitive advantage. So we're pretty accustomed to dealing with these differing levels of, we're always grateful when we can talk about the stories. Sometimes the really cool ones are the ones you can't talk about. But we find a way to get the word out as much as we can. We try to.
Talk a bit about your role, if you would, as Chief Information Officer. So you're a tech leader within a fundamentally tech-centric organization.
Right.
Can you talk a bit about how you fit into the broader organization?
Yeah, there's a running gag that, the only reason that we have a CIO at Palantir is so that somebody goes to jail if we do the wrong thing.
We're very comforting to hear that.
I know, it's extremely comforting. Yeah, I question my decisions over and over. We're a company that lets IT organizations and technical people all over companies kind of set free to do their work, right? Which we can talk about throughout our conversation today. So it puts a role like CIO in this really interesting light. I mean, and look, like the CIO as a role is different in basically every company anyway, right? Like there's no two that are alike really, at least the ones that I talk to. In my world, the CIO role is very internally focused and very operational. And that's actually true with pretty much every, really responsible job or leadership job at Palantir. We're a company that doesn't tend to delegate operational things away. We tend not to delegate execution away. So most of my time, 75% plus of my time is actually running IT and aligned adjacent things within Palantir. Among those things, all of our internal cloud rolls up to me, all of our compute storage infrastructure, security systems, some auth, obviously IT operations, technical compliance, a lot of our business systems and financial systems and that sort of thing, bookkeeping systems. So, and adjacent to that, I have some product responsibilities. We have several dev organizations within IT that are building various different things, which again, we can also talk about as we go through the conversation. So yeah, and then with the rest of my time, I'm having conversations like this, or working increasingly with customers who are interested in how we do what we do, and how our execution leads us to have the products that we have, and how they can learn from that.
Very interesting. I was fascinating from our past conversations to learn how efficient your team is, and one that has become more efficient across time.
Yeah.
One would think with the remarkable growth through now, closing in on $4 billion in annual revenue, that you must have a massive organization around you, and that's not the case. Talk a bit about why that isn't the case, and how you can do what you've just described within the grand scheme of things, relatively few people.
Yeah. There's there's a big conversation now with a lot of our customers and prospective customers about, like, you can run on Palantir or you can run like Palantir, and those two things make most sense when they're together. So this is a run like Palantir conversation. When I've been in the org, or around IT org in Palantir 12 years, like you mentioned, and you never really think, when you're kind of growing up in an organization, and doing all these different jobs throughout it, that one of the things you're going to end up doing is dismantling it, right? Like, you never really seek that out. That's not, you assume you're going to be building it further. When I took over as CIO, the business was changing really drastically, right? Our commercial product, Palantir Foundry, was rapidly maturing. More and more companies were using it to solve their problems, and they were getting a lot of efficiencies out of it. I looked at how we had built the IT organization here, and it was big. It was, with full-time internal employees and contractors and consultants, it was over 200 people at that time. And there's a cultural value inside Palantir it's about, like, kind of trying to decalcify something. Like, the more something is an institution that must be propped up and nobody can imagine life without it, kind of the more your instinct should be to try to break it, right? So actually, I read a Wall Street Journal article. This is a long time ago, by a guy named Joe Pephart, who is an MIT professor, business professor at MIT at the time. I think he's UC Davis now. Called "It's Time to Abolish the IT Organization," something like that. They made the case that putting the org in its own bubble pretty much guarantees that it's always going to be a day late and a dollar short compared to the business that you're actually trying to power. It puts you in a position of servitude. It puts you in a position of, like, you're a snack bar operator taking short order cook sort of orders over the counter. And there's just, that puts an upper bound on how good you can get. So we embarked on this factoring out, federating the organization into the rest of the company, actually making some teams pretty substantially smaller in the process, just by virtue of taking a hard look at how we're grouped around the work and what's actually needed in the modern era to do that work, not what we've always thought was needed. And over that time, we went from 200 or a little over 200 to now our full-time, our internal employee count in IT here is below 80. I think it's 77 or something right now. I should know that number. And of course, we still have some contractors and consultants, but that workforce has been greatly reduced as well, because it just makes more sense to us now the way we operate the in-house a lot of those functions. It's been a pretty interesting journey. Not something I ever would have thought that I would have actually pushed out, let alone been part of.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and don't need to tell you how different it is from most of your peers. And you've noted, and again in our past conversations, that there's some reasons that this works. You've started to allude to some of them, but I wanted to highlight 4 points you at least highlighted to me, and then cover each of them with you. That you mentioned the pivot to customer zero, a democratized delivery and development, a different delivery model, and then no centers of excellence. Let's cover each of those in turn, if you don't mind, beginning with customer zero.
Absolutely. And just to be upfront, these are all facets of the same thing. These are all ways that we've been trying to spin a certain type of flywheel faster and faster. So as I'm telling this story, I'll try to link them all together. So customer zero, our like any company, you want to run on yourself, right? Palantir has been around for 20 plus years. Palantir Foundry, especially Foundry with AIP, as it is now in its modern iteration, much, much less than that. So we had a similar problem to a lot, or similar opportunity, I guess, to a lot of our customers, which is we were working off of a 5 to 15-year-old tech stack and set of processes and human structures, as we talked about, and looking at something that was vastly better. So in late 2023, we kicked off a series of change initiatives to get to the point where we are now, where we're aggressively adopting Foundry as a replacement product for a lot of commercially sourced things, and trying to do that in a way that models for our customers as well, and feeds back to the product organization.
Very interesting. Talk a bit about this democratized delivery and development that you've also highlighted.
Sure. Yeah, one of the features, democratized development and delivery, is one of the features, one of the main calling cards of Palantir Foundry. Actually, it has to do with how the security construct, the object layer of the data, which we call the ontology, like a semantic object set that represents all the nouns in your organization. How you can, if you permission that correctly in the way the product's designed, you can set free a lot of people towards the edges of your organization to build whatever they need to build to solve their problems. Of course, you have to have a governance construct and all of these other things kind of set up to deal with that, so you don't just unleash the bad kind of chaos in your organization. But what we found is it unleashes the good kind of chaos, in the sense that instead of letting roadmaps, like long-term roadmaps, be the defining thing about change in IT, but also in the rest of our internal functions, we found it kind of flipped the script, where all of a sudden people at the edge of the organization were frustrated with processes or frustrated with the tools we had given them. We're starting to, it's like you're legitimizing shadow IT. You're asking people to pull IT in the direction that their work actually needs it to go, which was intrinsic to our adoption of Foundry. Right? And I don't think we could have really done one without the other.
Very interesting. And then you talked about the different delivery model was a key catalyst as well. Talk a bit more about that, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, this gets into the governance story a little bit as well, right? There was always and this pre-games the centers of excellence conversation too. You know, that we always had a data engineering team, for example, or an internal dev team who served the needs of all the functions at Palantir, right? And that's just in 2014, 15, when those things came about. That's actually fairly forward thinking, right? And it worked and it was great. What we found was that as the scale of data was growing, there's actually no way to build an internal, especially if you're trying to make the org smaller and federate it within the company, there's no way to build an internal data engineering organization that is close enough to the actual source of the data or the use of the data to have any understanding of what's actually going on. And so what we found was, as the scale of the data was growing, our rate of spilling data on ourselves, or needing to remediate things, or reliability or accuracy, data freshness issues, was outpacing the rate of growth of the data. So we had to think about, how do we deliver the data to the edges of the organization where these builders are, in such a way that they can actually do the right thing and stay on the right side of standards compliance and have fresh and accurate data. So one of the things we've been working on is having, instead of a data engineering, data governance group, instead having all the systems engineers across all the rest of IT and adjacent teams, including the HR team, legal, some others, procurement team, any team that owns or operates a system that sources data into the warehouse, having those folks be the ones that are responsible for the compliance, correctness, freshness, performance of the data, not just up to the boundary of Palantir Foundry, but into Foundry. So that requires a bunch of retraining and a bunch of upskilling for those folks. But what it means is, if I'm a person at the edge of the org and I need access to HR data, the person who's going to grant that to me is actually somebody in HR. And if I have a problem with that data, the source of that data in HR, Workday in our case is our HCM, the people who run Workday, both the HR folks and the IT folks, are going to be the people answering my data ticket as well, not the data engineering organization. That change in delivery meshed with that change in governance unlocked a huge amount of velocity for us. Obviously, I could talk about it forever too.
I wanted to get into the last of the four, which is no centers of excellence, which is such an interesting Just hearing the words is such an interesting concept. Peel back that onion, if you will.
Yeah. This is linked to one of the big things I'm trying to get done this year at IT too, is the kind of like reshaping the org and rethinking how we group people around the outcomes. Like the centers of excellence thing. I mean, first off, any Palantir person who's listening to this, we don't really use the word centers of excellence inside Palantir. I mean, there's going to be functions of people who need to be experts in things, right? That's just de facto. Expertise exists and it has value. But grouping those folks far away from where the work is getting done or where it's needed is a pretty dangerous proposition, right? Like it's that snack bar mentality that I talked about a couple of items ago. You, as a person who provides that expertise or somebody who runs that center of excellence, you want to create focus for your people, but what it actually does is it's a layer of separation from the actual work getting done. So we're always looking for ways to break a center of excellence and put it closer to the business. Like we're in the process, our product organization's in the process of doing that with part of recruiting right now, right? Where it's like to get the recruiting organization closest to the places where the recruitment actually needs to happen, you actually have to put them right next to each other. So they're all in the boat rowing together. It's kind of like, it's not a new idea, but for us, we, like most things in Palantir, we lean into it in this really hardcore way, and just kind of and try to work through and try to iterate quickly and get it done. So that's how it's manifested.
Very interesting. And so, I mean, so much of what you have described cuts against the grain of a lot of your peers as CIOs. And I wonder, I mean, to what extent, obviously yours is a very different company, but also yours personally is a very different background. You don't come with any baggage of having been a CIO somewhere else or having any role in IT anywhere else as you grew up in IT in Palantir. We'll get a little bit further into the specifics of the early stages a little later. But, I wonder the extent to which that's been helpful to you to not have inherited wisdom that of what must be based upon how most other peers operate their IT shops. Is that fair?
I think that's fair, and it's a good way to say it. If you look at most people who hold a lot of responsibility at Palantir, I'm not going to say I hold a lot, but I hold some. Most of us grew up in the company to an extent. There are notable exceptions, obviously, but I think by and large, internal folks make up most of the folks who carry a bunch of responsibility here. And it's for that exact reason, right? Like if the whole thing is about defying a type of orthodoxy, certainly in IT, that's the case for me, for what I'm trying to build. But I think the company in general is about running against a type of orthodoxy in thinking, right? And certainly our customers value that. We try to generate alpha for our customers, right? And come with new ideas that are breakaway, in some direction or another that generates whatever the outcome is they're looking for. So it's hard to produce that kind of alpha, whether with the customers or internally, if you do things the same way everybody else does them. So for a long time, it actually was a source of imposter syndrome for me, to be honest. Like I would go to these CIO gatherings and like not understand any of the jargon that was happening and feel like I hadn't hopped the same 7 companies as everybody else, and I didn't play golf with these folks. And it's like, oh man, like what am I even doing in this room? It's now that the results are showing, there's different ways to do things that really can add to the conversation, right? And that's something that it's a big value at Palantir. That's a thing we try to put out there in everything that we do.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And why do you suppose people, that there's the performance of the organization? There may be the obvious reasons. Are there any non-obvious reasons as to why there are people of such long tenure like yourself who've chosen to stay for so long, operating, by the way, in a milieu in Silicon Valley where it is de rigueur to hop from company to company? I mean, you have worlds of opportunities, within blocks of where you are at all times. It's pretty extraordinary that that's the case.
Yeah, one longtime colleague of mine jokes it's because we've all gone feral. Like there's not we feel like we could survive anymore. For me personally, I can answer that by saying, I've been CIO now. I'm in my 3rd full year, I suppose, and that's by far the longest I've ever done any one role here. I think most people who are at Palantir self-select to be here because they're curious, they're generative, like they're kind of unsatisfied with sitting still. Often they're overachievers, they're overqualified for whatever they're doing. It's like these really switched on people. And for a lot of us who've stuck around for a long time, it's that constant new set of challenges, or there's this constant, I'm always the dumbest person in every room that I'm in. And I find that just addictive. Like there's always some interesting thing going on. Um, I feel like I'm answering like an interviewee's question, like somebody who's applying to the company going like, why are you here? But it's actually true. It's not just a company line. And I think a lot of people who've been here more than a decade would say exactly the same thing. It's the right kind of perpetually challenging, perpetual productive discomfort. And it's addictive.
Yeah. I want to talk a bit about the year ahead.
Sure.
You shared with me that you've got three different areas you're focused from that perspective,
Yes.
continuing the ongoing evolution of the Customer Zero program, reshaping the team to a greater extent, and introducing greater levels of resiliency and hardening the organization's systems. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the future of each of those. We've talked a bit about Customer Zero,
Sure.
and fascinating, obviously, for in an organization like yours to be able to have that role, have some influence on the product as a peer to many of the company's customers. Talk a bit about the what you see as the ongoing evolution of that program.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I had more influence on the product, actually. You would think that we were first in line. We're actually kind of last, right? I mean, our paying customers are pretty important to us as a company. So, part of what we're doing is being better customers of our product organization. So going really big with that, being really, really good partners for the folks that are building and putting out our product. Moreover, though, it's about going from, can we do this, to, yeah, I think this is going to work for us, to going like really bombastic with it. So, internally, we're starting to talk about it instead of Customer Zero. We're talking about it as like building the operating system, right? So that's what we put out there in our marketing materials. What we tell our customers to do, right? You can run your entire enterprise on Palantir Foundry. And so we're like, okay, let's see what that looks like in practice. Let's see how far we can push that envelope in 25 and 26. 23 for us was about pivoting away from the traditional tech stack and starting to change people's training and how they're approaching the work and making it part of everybody's job to use our products in a different way than they had before. 24 was about going to production with that, and getting that flywheel spinning faster, getting a few really big marquee use cases out there, starting to really generate some energy and some attention with our customers and internally. 25 is about like, this is a mature operating model. This is what we're going to be doing. We're going really big.
And it's fascinating. And talk a bit about the ongoing reshaping of the team to a greater extent.
Sure.
What will that entail?
Yeah, that's kind of the other part of building the operating system. So the traditional staffing model of the traditional, like, we'll go back to 2014, 15, 16, right? At that time, Palantir's headcount was accelerating really rapidly. Many other tech companies was like, great, like headcount growth uber alles, right? To unlock growth in your revenue and whatever. So at the time we went full SaaS, full cloud, like everybody else did, right? And so there's a bunch of assumptions that come along with that about what the team ought to look like. Going back to the beginning of our conversation, Peter, this is the team that I inherited, right? And the tech stack that I inherited. So it's like you have a bunch of specialized skills, right? You have Salesforce engineers, you have Workday engineers, you have NetSuite engineers. These people, like, they're specialists in these platforms. It's largely the same type of programming language that they do, but like with proprietary little tweaks on it. They carry like industry certifications for these things, and they're functional and techno-functional, and like there's like a specific array of like the way that you build these teams. You supplement them with contractors or consultants from a specific set of houses that do a specific set of things. And there's just kind of like there's like this de rigueur kind of like de facto way that you staff this and run it. As we adopt more Foundry as the operating system for IT, we're realizing that there's a generalizable skill set that's happening here. So that we have really skilled systems engineers from all of these different SaaS worlds. You're still just strong mainstay members of the team. That this expertise is there for a reason. As they learn to address more of that engineering thinking to the Foundry platform, and the AI assist and copilot features in the platform help them do that and accelerate their learning and output. We're finding that there's a generalizable thing where you really only need one or two subject matter experts surrounded by a bunch of really good Foundry systems engineers. And so it's letting us be a lot more the way our business side is, where like famously for a long time there were to like 2,000 people with the title forward deployed engineer in Palantir, right? And it was so that everybody could flow and flex around and like go to wherever the need was or whatever. What we need to be able to do in IT is that. And so that's the thing that we're trying to finish the stroke on in 25. Take those generalizable skill sets, build these flexible, fluid teams, so that way we can all jump on the most important outcomes, surge on them, and bang them out that much better.
That makes sense. And you also are hoping to harden the systems and foster greater degrees of resiliency. Makes a lot of sense. But what are some of the methods you're doing to ensure that's the case?
Yeah. This is a pretty different topic than we've talked about so far in the conversation. But every company needs to be thinking about resiliency, right? Every CIO right now, if you look at the way the world is, it's dynamic, right? And at the very least, as dynamic and uncertain as things are, that it behooves you to think about how do you keep your company running. For many CIOs also, I would argue, we should be thinking about how to position our companies for maximum advantage in a dynamic situation. And certainly in Palantir, that's the case. Even in calm times, part of my job is to design and plan for maximum optionality for our business decision makers, not for tiny margin optimizations, right? Like we really think about keeping the aperture of decision making open as far into the future as possible, and not letting tech choices or like the purity of a roadmap lock us into old assumptions. So in a dynamic world like we have in 25, there's just an embarrassment of riches of things that a CIO ought to be thinking about, or that I'm thinking about, right? So it's like, just to name a few in no particular order, industrial sabotage is a really huge one, right? The next time somebody drags their anchor over undersea fiber somewhere in the world, the specter of trade imbalances or tariffs or difficulty getting things, whatever you want to call it today. And by the time this comes out, I'm sure the news will be totally different than it was today. Yesterday was different than that. Certainly the ongoing escalation of cyber warfare, information security between the United States and allied countries and some others is getting more and more aggressive. Therefore, moving people around the world is getting and keeping them connected, keeping them safe is much more challenging. And like a lot of companies, we're all AWS shops, or maybe we were Azure shops or whatever. And there's always more that infrastructure thinkers can be doing to shore up, like what's your multi-region, what's your multi-AZ zone, multi-AZ strategy, what's your multi-cloud DR strategy. I think there's a lot of thoughts out there, but I mean, if you look on Gartner's CIO tool, it's always in the perennially top 3 things that people are searching recently. I think there's a good reason why.
It makes sense, certainly. It sounds like in the balance, the things you're planning for also are ensuring your organization is supporting this remarkable growth that the company foresees, certainly is experienced and foresees, such that it can do so with great nimbleness and ensuring that you can pivot quickly as opportunity presents itself, pivot away from danger more rapidly as well,
Exactly.
and ensure that yours is an organization that's fostering that nimbleness. Is that fair?
Exactly. That's really well said. Honestly, that is a good summation of. That's one facet of a summation of basically everything we've talked about in this conversation, right? Like everything that we do here has to be with an eye toward that nimbleness, and that the ability to pivot toward safety or pivot toward a good business outcome, pivot toward or away from a geopolitical issue, usually toward, we tend to run toward them, not away from at Palantir. Like that has to be infused in everything that we're doing. Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I wanted to, as I mentioned in the introduction, you have a really unusual background. Just hearing you speak and the technical details that are, obviously clearly in your mind in an organization that is extraordinarily complex. Other than the fact that I mentioned it before this conversation began, one would certainly be very surprised to know that when you were at the age of 30, you were not a technologist at all. In fact, to that point, you were pursuing music. You have a graduate degree in it from a university that happens to also have a great technology program, in addition to a great music program in Carnegie Mellon. But at 30, you decided you might try something else. And talk Talk a bit about that pivot from
Yeah.
music to what would eventually be the ladder that you began to climb at Palantir.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many directions to take with this. Um, I joke that a lot of the reason why I ever got any job in technology is because I accidentally got music degrees from great engineering schools, not with that as the goal. But because I was in those schools, I went to the University of Illinois for my undergrad and Carnegie Mellon for a master's degree. And because I was just, yeah, I was doing this thing. I was hanging out with a bunch of engineers who were musicians for a hobby. And I was like a musician as a profession who sort of like dabbled in being an engineer for a hobby, right? Like I was always sort of curious about this stuff. I was always exposed to world-class engineers, engineers and computer scientists and roboticists and so forth. And so the music business, especially in the early 2000s, with the Great Recession at that time and other sort of economic hiccups, was a tough business. It's always a tough business, right? And for every one person who's in the Boston Symphony, there are hundreds of the rest of us who are teaching high school lessons and spending a lot of time in the car driving from place to place. And I got to my late 20s and thought, I don't really like this a whole lot anymore. And it's one of those businesses, you really got to be in it. And I have all these other curiosities, and I've always had all these other curiosities. Let me think about doing something different, right? And somebody who's really hungry for these seats in the Youngstown Symphony in Ohio or whatever, that I'm just taking up a seat and not really liking it anymore. Somebody else who's really hungry for it can have that gig. So I was working at an Apple store at the time, just killing time at the Genius Bar at an Apple store. By the way, our head of IT operations now was my lead at that store at that time. We stayed in touch all these years, and I ended up finally stealing him to come to Palantir. And I had a customer there who I was working with who had a Palantir, like a recruiting swag water bottle. And I had never heard of Palantir in those days. This is 2012, outside of the, intelligence community or, some small set of financial services. Nobody really had, right? It wasn't a big name. It wasn't, the notoriety wasn't there yet. So company sounded interesting. I went online and I sort of, to the job site. I wasn't applying for any other jobs. I had a perfectly fine job. I just, at this Apple store. And so I picked the only thing that I could apply for that I thought I wasn't going to get laughed out of the room for, which was tech support. And the only place that there was an opening at that time, which was the Washington, D.C. office. I was living in Pittsburgh, so it's easy. It's 4 hours down the road. And applied and didn't get the job. I was offered a contractor role. So that was February of 2013.
Are there aspects of your time as a musician and the way in which that's oriented your mind that you find useful in the work that you do?
That is a fantastic question. Yes, every day. Classical musicians don't say this out loud very often, but it's really like a craftsmanship job, and it's more than an artistry job to sit in the back of an orchestra. So it's like nobody showed up. I was a trombonist, right? Nobody pays money for a ticket to hear the guy in the trombone section moat. They came to hear what Wagner or Beethoven or Brahms wrote, right? So there's a piece of spending hours and hours every day to align with this other vision, reproduce it extremely skillfully, and kind of maybe put your own spin on it every once in a while. That sounds an awful lot like the IT business in a lot of ways, right? So that's one thing. The pain tolerance, I think, equipped me really well for Palantir, where you spend 8 hours, tens of thousands of hours of your life for free, just getting yelled at, just practicing to make yourself better and torturing yourself to get there. That sounds a lot like Palantir in some ways. And I think, for me personally, once I had been on stage in front of, a giant paying audience and playing a solo and that I was unprepared for in a weird, these weird circumstances that arise in the performing arts, I was pretty rattle proof. Like no business executive is as scary as name your famous orchestra conductor, right? Like, so yeah, I think it was actually a great preparation. And there are a lot of other Palantirians who have come from the liberal arts, not necessarily music, although there are a few. Most of the musicians stay in music, right? Like they didn't flunk out like I did. But there are a lot of people from the liberal arts. There are a lot of people from the humanities because I think a lot of them have that in common, right? There's that like perfecting your craft. There's this thinking in a very specific way that like leads you to communicate and collaborate in a specific way. And a lot of those folks, especially in IT in my world, I prefer folks like that come from these unconventional backgrounds. They bring a lot of interesting thinking.
Yeah, super interesting. Thank you for those reflections. I wanted to ask, we've talked about a number of topics throughout this. Any trends as you look to the future, the year ahead or even beyond, that or have you particularly intrigued? What would you underscore, Jim?
I mean, the elephant in the corner of the room is AI, right? Like every LinkedIn thought leadership post and every, whatever, it's all about what does AI mean? Is it worth anything? Is it not worth anything? Is agentic architecture going to be so I think that the growing trend that I'm excited about is the specific viewpoint, quiet and small at first and getting louder and louder as it produces the best results, that you cannot get and go buy an AI thing because your board yelled at you to not miss the bus and then run around with a hammer looking for nails trying to find value with it. There's increasingly rigorous thinking about how to apply AI in a way that's valuable for IT, because you're already running an IT organization that's valuable for your business. And so I think it's forcing a lot of us in the IT profession to really think critically about what it is we're actually trying to do to run our businesses, not just to support, but to actively be accretive to the business and actually value building and be worth an investment. It's a knock-on benefit to AI that I think a lot of people, talk about, like labor savings and all this cost avoidance and all this other stuff. But I think it's increasing focus on the value of IT. I think is something that we're under talking about. I think it's just growing.
That's great. Yeah. Great points you raise. I wanted to also ask you, is there anything you've recently read, watched, and or listened to that you would recommend to those who are watching and listening to this?
Yes. I'll give you one of all three. On watching, I've just got done rewatching Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's very serious, scholarly work. I find myself quoting Captain Picard far too often, poorly quoting. I've just gotten done rereading I tend to reread and rewatch things. Rereading after many years, probably 10 years since I last reread it. I'm a history buff. I got done reading by Doris Kearns Goodwin, the book Team of Rivals, about Abraham Lincoln and how Abraham Lincoln built his cabinet and the really complex dynamics that they had. Every time, it is my third time reading this book over the course of probably 15 years. And every time I read it, I learn something else. It's why I keep rereading things that are worth rereading. It's amazing. And as far as podcasts go, I recently got really into the podcast Acquired. I think I was late to that party. I think everybody else in the business was already into it. And it was just like a bombshell to me. It's like this long form sort of the adventure story of running a business, like fantastic. I find it amazing.
Like an audiobook and conversation between the two.
Yes, absolutely.
No, great suggestions all around, Jim. And Jim, thanks moreover for a great conversation across the board. Really fascinating to hear more about your career journey, more about the evolution of the company and the many steps that you're taking to ensure that yours is a team that's supporting the remarkable growth that this company has had and likely will continue to have as well. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me. It's been a great time.